I'm James Dubs, and today we're going to talk about making some wire connections. When we're doing demo and fixing up cars, we're extending wires a lot, and we have to do a lot of wire connections, and we're going to talk about the different ways to do it, and then we're going to talk about the way I like to do it, which I think is the best way, and I think it's cheaper too. And we can do some of the reasons why you don't want to use the other connections, and we can go and show you exactly the problems that we could have, and then we're going to show the soldered connections and how much more it holds, and we can get a much more professional look if that's what we're going for. We're a little bit closer now, and here's a few of our tools that we can use to do wire connections. Personally, I don't use these, but let's try them out. They're above that mark. It doesn't want to work, and I don't think they work very good anyways, but if we have ourselves right up against the stopper, it still doesn't work that great. And I don't use them very often. I think they're an expensive tool that doesn't work very good. Everybody has one of these. You could go to the right size. This is 14 gauge, so you'd put it in our gap, close it in, and strip it off, and that works pretty good. We also can cut it. Alright guys, so when we do soldering, our good soldering temperature is a small range between 400 to 600 degrees, but we don't really have a thermometer to tell us what temperature it is, and we don't have enough time to measure it because it wouldn't stay at the good temperature long enough for us to measure it and get back to it. So we don't know what temperature it is, so we have to start soldering. We're going to start at our cold temperature, and we're going to put the heat on it, and we're going to be ready to solder when we get up to this temperature, and we're going to see the solder start taking into the copper as we're soldering, and we're going to remove the heat, and if we need a little bit more, we're going to let it drop below this temperature, and if we need more heat, we're going to add the heat until it takes the solder, and we're going to make sure and take the heat off before it gets too much. We're going to twist them together nice and tight and make sure that none of the frays are sticking out because we're going to be shrink tubing or taping this afterwards. We're going to light our torch. We're going to make sure that we're using electrical solder, rosin core. We're going to put the torch on there and the solder at the same time, and it's going to take two very quickly. This is 16 gauge wire, so that's going to be a very quick solder, and that's a good thing because the heat doesn't travel up the wire and melt it very far. Now we're going to do another connection. If we're doing a solder joint that's near some type of fuel source that might blow us up, we need to make sure that we're not using a torch, so we have to use something else. So I have a regulated solder iron right here. The other solder irons work, but you have to make sure that your iron doesn't get too hot and then tarnish. And that's something that is a big downfall of most solder irons. This has already been heated up. I got it set on number 4. I've had it heating up for probably 20 minutes, so it's at the right temperature. It holds the temperature right at the top of our temperature. So we need to get that little bit of ugly stuff off the tip of our solder iron right there. So we're going to take this solder and we're going to put a little glob of it on there, and we're going to wipe it off on our wet sponge here. And then it's nice and shiny right there. And we're going to take our solder iron and put it on the bottom of our joint. Well, let's put it on the top of the joint. We're going to get a little bit of that solder on the tip, because that solder on the tip helps heat up the copper. And then we're going to put the solder on the bottom, and we're going to just run that heat right over top of that thing. Give it a little bit more solder on the tip. And that looks like a good solder joint right there. And we can do that right beside a gas tank safely. The next thing to do is to put some shrink tube over top of this, or if we're doing a derby, we don't want to waste money on shrink tube, so we'll just use electrical tape. What I have here is we have one of the better connectors here, and if you look at it, the main thing that's so much better is that it's shrink tube and it's got glue on the inside and it keeps the water out. That's the main thing that makes these connectors so much better than the cheapest ones that we can get. And that does make it hold better. And the main reason that people hate these so much and they don't work for people is because they're too easy to pull out. And a lot of cars today have to have a signal to see what they're getting for a position, like something like the throttle has to get a signal that looks a lot like this test signal right here. This is just a test signal off of the oscilloscope, and it happens really quickly. And this is the signal that the car has to see. And right now I just put this wire on there and there's not a problem. And if I pull too hard, it doesn't take very much. Right there it pulls out. It's just about pulled out. See, this one actually held, and the one that was glued, it held the jacketing, but it didn't hold the other part in here. And the problem that you're going to get, if you look at the oscilloscope there, when these two are still kind of touching but not really, it's going to give you that really funny signal right there. See right there, that signal there, it's going to start getting right at that point where it's going to get a fuzzy signal right there. And when it's getting a fuzzy signal like that, rather than the clean signal, that's when it's not going to know what's going on, and it's going to do erratic things, and we're not going to know why. And the reason is because we didn't solder our wires together. Had we soldered it together and used something just like electrical tape to cover it up, we would have been plenty as strong, and we never would have had to worry about getting a signal that's incorrect.
So don't forget, when you're doing soldering connections, and if you're using a torch, you need to make sure you're not close to something that might be flammable, like a gas tank, because you don't want to blow yourself up. Save that for the demo. Okay? If you're too close to a gas tank, you should use some other type of soldering iron to do that type of a job. So make sure do soldering and shrink tube on your electrical connections on your personal vehicle, and use soldering and electrical tape on your demo cars. So good luck. We'll see you at the demo.